Welcome to the Measure K debate. This is the most soft-spoken panel of the day. None of these people have particularly loud opinions. Actually, just when we were coming up here, I was talking to Mickey Kasparian, who's the president of the United Food and Commercial Workers Union and the president of the San Diego Imperial County's Labor Council. Did I say that right? If you don't know Mickey, he's a pretty opinionated guy. He said, boy, you know, it's going to be fun being on a panel with Steve Peace. It'll be the first time I'll be the most soft-spoken guy in town. So this is a panel on Measure K. If you don't know this already, the way elections in the city of San Diego work today is that in primary elections, if it is an open primary, there are no parties listed on the ballot, everybody competes in one race, and if you get over 50% of the vote, then you win outright. Measure K would change that to make it, no matter what, the top two vote getters would proceed to a runoff election in November. It also has a companion measure you should know, Measure L, which does something very similar with ballot measures. So for any citizens initiative or referendum, unless the city council takes other action, once those have enough signatures and the city council authorizes them, those will also go on November ballots and not June ballots. This is shaping up to be one of the most expensive races on the November ballot because it is a fundamental change in the way we elect the people who represent us in this city. So the group we have together representing each side, we have on my far left Councilman Cate. Councilman Cate had a interesting exchange on the city council when this was first put on the ballot, where it got a little bit testy between him and Jeff Marston, one of the advocates of the measure. Unfortunately, that debate was cut off by Council President Sherry Leitner. I intend not to do that today, so we'll actually get through a lot of the details that we didn't get to sort out that day. Next to him is Ryan Clumpner. He's a political strategist and consultant in town. He's running the campaign against Measure K. And then to my far right, we have former State Assemblyman Steve Peace. He is associated with the Independent Voter Project, which is one of the independent groups that put this ballot on the measure, or put this measure on the ballot in the first place. And next to him is, who I already introduced, Mickey Kasparian, whose group is expected to spend a lot of money in favor of this in favor of this measure this year. So that said, we're going to keep this pretty open. There is no rigid format. I'm going to allow people to argue quite a bit. We will, I will ask pointed questions, and there will be opportunities to rein people in if necessary. But for the most part, we're going to just try as best we can to get to the bottom of this. And I'll start with the yes side. So this is, once again, I know this is sometimes confusing in California with ballot measures. You don't know whether yes means you want the thing or no means you want the thing. Yes means you want to change the city election process so that all races go to a November runoff. So to the left, to the yes side, I'll start with Steve Peace. What is the problem with city elections today? And in fact, what evidence is there that the way we are doing things is not democratic enough? Oh, before you answer, I have a couple announcements I need to make. First of all, if you want to tweet about the discussion while it's going on, please use the hashtag Politifest. And we will open it up for questions from the audience after the fact. The screens will have phone numbers that you can text your questions to. Those texts will go directly to Scott Lewis, and he will cull them, pick out the best questions, and we will ask them towards the end of the debate. So, back to you, Steve. What is the problem, and what evidence is there that there's a problem?
Well, first of all, the Independent Voter Project has been involved in not only this measure, but intervening in legal proceedings in New Jersey. The Independent Voter Project is a nationwide organization that is dedicated to a simple proposition, that democracy works best when elections are decided when the most people vote. It's the last great civil rights issue of our culture and our democracy. It should come to no surprise to you that general elections are the elections in which younger people vote, minorities vote, workers vote in higher propensity, and primary elections are elections that are dominated by people who are already empowered. It's no accident that we're all frustrated with what's going on in Washington, D.C., where we seem to see the same recycling of the same faces, whether it's Republican or Democrat, the same political positions over and over again. We intervened with a legal effort to challenge New Jersey's primary last year because that primary system is a totally closed primary system in which the average turnout in the primaries is 9%. 9%. We wrote the open primary initiative here in California, where we had a circumstance which I lived as a legislator, first in a closed system, then in a semi-open system, and back in a closed system. And I learned the reality that it doesn't really change so much who gets elected when you make sure that your elections are determined in the general election when the most people vote. It doesn't really change outcomes so much. You'll still get elected, Councilman. You'll be fine. But it forces the politicians to be responsive to real people, as opposed to the Mickey Kasparians who have access to power and the others that have access. We're in Maine and dealing with a ranked choice proposition in Maine. And I noted that Mr. Cate suggested that a ranked choice might be something we want to consider. And if we had thought for a moment that would have been seriously considered, we'd have jumped on that and said, let's go. But we knew at this moment in San Diego's history that ranked choice and things like that are down the line. You got to do these things incrementally. And it was just a public discussion designed to try and create a reason to put it off into the side and say, well, let's study it for another 30 years. Similarly, we're involved in South Dakota in another open primary element. And they all have the same theme, going to your point. The bottom line is low turnout elections and election schemes that direct decisions to be made in low turnout primaries are the seed corn of corruption. And they're the seed corn of the perpetuation of power. I was born and raised here in San Diego. I grew up in Allied Gardens. My home, my backyard looked right across the gorge, and I saw San Diego State grow up. I saw the hotel industry destroy Mission Valley, which was dairy farms and a small meandering road that today became Highway 8. And the irony is, I'm old enough to know that the same families that began that destruction and today profit from Mission Bay leases from the city and port leases downtown. They're the same families. They're the same half dozen names. Same people. And the answer to your question is very simple. If you're okay with having 5 or 6 families run this town and make all its decisions, we can save a lot of things. We can have a better, simple, more efficient, much more cost-effective system. Let's just tell them directly what they're going to do, rather than filter their decisions through elected officials that are totally dependent on them.
I mean, Steve, you've just put everything that's ever happened in San Diego at the feet of a non-required runoff. I mean, what is the evidence that the way things have been decided in San Diego recently are directly because June elections are allowed to settle elections?
You know, the best evidence is a call I got from Lorena Gonzalez after she had spent about 1.5 years in the legislature. Lorena had spent a great deal of time raising money against open primary and campaigning against it up and down the state, angry at Steve Peace and those other Democrats who worked with Republicans, my fellow colleagues, some out in the open and some who didn't want to be criticized by their fellow Republicans. And Lorena's telephone call was after she had had an opportunity to serve in the legislature, and I suspect it's going to be the same call I'm going to get from Councilman Cate. You know, I'm sorry I didn't understand it, but now that I've lived with it as an elected official for a couple of years, I get it now. This is about making me and connecting me to my constituents and putting me in the position, and Mickey will remember this. They had some tough times with Lorena when she first got elected. There's a couple of issues. They expected her to be just there for them, and all of a sudden she wasn't. It gives the elected official the freedom to have the direct relationship with their constituent and bypass, whether it's Mickey on one side or it's the hoteliers over here on the other side. It just doesn't. At the end of the day, Well, whether it's the text messages that come down from the mayor's chief of staff directing you to change votes.
I wish it was a hotelier.
Yeah. Well, or it's the Lincoln Club givers, the 13 people that resuscitate that. Or on the other side, you think, it's just, look, I'm old enough, it doesn't matter. I've been shot and killed a long time ago. Dead men can't be killed twice. The real world is born and raised here. I know who the movers and shakers are. I know them better than you know them. And I see them manipulate succeeding generations of young people who come into a process. And you look at the consequence. This is a beautiful town with that nature.
I think my time is up.
Yeah. I gotta move over. Thanks for your thoughts on that. So I want to send it to the other side. There's a lot for you to respond to there, obviously, and you'll get your chance. I do want to pose it to you in a direct question, though, which is, what is the great fear? What do we have to lose by settling local elections in a way that is, generally speaking, the same as we settle state races?
I don't think that's the issue, and I think that this entire discussion has gotten derailed into a particular narrative that is being put forward here.
What is that?
If all of you in this room believe that this change to how elections is being done is actually being proposed right now as this benevolent power giveaway by the lobbyists on the other side of the table here, then you should absolutely vote for it. And I'm sure you're exactly the type of voters that they would love to have deciding every measure. That's not what's happening here. I'm really honored to be on the stage, to be totally blunt, because I'm not an elected official. I never have been. I don't run a labor union. I'm not a lobbyist for developers. I'm just a guy who's worked on a handful of campaigns in San Diego over the last 5 years. And from that standpoint, I'm actually the only person here who I feel like I win no matter what happens. If my side wins on this, I get a win on my record. If my side loses on this, I'll probably make 30 to 40% as much money in 2018 when we have double the elections in front of you. So
Beautiful system.
I would I am absolutely not afraid of this. I think that the problem here is that we're setting a precedent that involves the manner in which we set the rules for an election, which is concocted privately by special interests, rushed through a process with minimal public input, and designed to benefit one side. Now, we can debate whether it will or will not. We might actually be in agreement that I don't think it will benefit one side. But the point is, we should not embark down a road where we change election rules to benefit one side or for the perceived benefit of one side in this manner. When you change elections, you should do it with thorough public input, thoroughly researched, thoroughly debated, and then put to a vote of the people. And maybe we ought to give them options instead of just putting one thing, Measure K, in the middle of 16 other ballot measures.
We'll get back to the yes side, but Steve had a lot to say, so we'll stay on the no side for just a little bit longer. Chris, they might dispute whether they are or not acting benevolently in pursuit of this measure. But let's say they aren't. How does that change what is the right way to do things? So it's concocted by special interests. What is the argument against doing it this way?
I think the main part of it is that and you went back, you talked about Measure L, is that I think there's an inherent conflict between Measure K and Measure L. Even though they're both being put forward by the same groups, they're supported by the same groups. And that is the idea about participation in government, which we all want. I won in November. I am not afraid to have a November election and only deal with a June measure. I want to talk to voters. I want to have most people participate. The inherent conflict of this, aside from the process standpoint, is that the proponents believe that there should be no June elections on referendums or initiatives, and that everybody should vote on these types of measures in November. I get that. I respect that. I'm not actually really against that. But when you look at Measure K, they want those voters in June to decide for November voters who are the top two that you get to vote on. So in one instance, we want to disenfranchise voters in June and have everything go November, but we don't want those same November voters to decide whether they like candidate 3, 4, or 5. If you want individuals and voters to vote on the whole selective amount of candidates in November, then had November-only elections. And part of the issue that I had when you talked about that council meeting is that when this was initially brought up, the argument from the proponents was that, well, many California cities are moving towards this type of system, or many California cities already have this type of system in place. So my office went back and looked at all nearly 500 cities in California, and not one city does it this way. The closest is Chula Vista.
Mr. Cate, wait a minute. No, don't lie.
That is absolutely right.
The
that
record
is
was
correct.
corrected, and you know that statement it was a misprint. And you know this that was the fact that it was.
That was
can I finish? The statement.
Can I finish? I think I was arguing first.
Hold on just a second, Steve.
Councilman, no, wait a minute.
Well, no,
what that statement was
Steve,
is that state elections, that most elections are determined that way, not cities.
Steve,
You
we'll
know
get to it in a second.
And you
Go ahead.
know it.
You're next.
That's why you
Go ahead.
took it off of your website. But in any event,
Right, because it was wrong.
because you were wrong and you got caught in it.
No.
90% of cities in California have a plurality system, where everyone runs in a single election, not even necessarily a November election. Some of them are in March, some of them are in June, but everyone runs in a general election. The most amount of votes wins. I'm totally okay with that. We can do that. If you want November elections, let's do it. Some do ranked choice. But what Mr. Peace said was that, well, we didn't have a public discussion to discuss this. Well, you're exactly right. We should have had a public discussion to talk about whether this is the right system for San Diego. Now, we reference a elections task force over a decade ago that was done by then Councilmember Donna Fry, and they looked at ranked choice voting. But technology has dramatically shifted in the last decade, and that should be up for discussion. We should have that option. And actually, when this came to the council, I put forward an option to say, let's look at plurality and ranked choice, put both to the voters, and decide what the voters want to do in terms of their system. That way we get the most amount of public discourse, and that was shot down.
You want to support ranked choice? We support ranked choice. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Let's get Mickey in.
You know what bothers me about being on this panel right now? It's that I'm bored. Because there's not a person so far that's really talking about the most important factor, the voters. What do voters want? It's to confuse people, right? All of this big talk about all these complex issues. Facts. As few as 20% of registered voters vote in June. And as high as 80% of registered voters vote in November. So first and foremost, it should be about democracy and full voter participation. Why would we want the smallest amount of voters to decide the people who lead us? Makes no sense at all. Another thing, it's to conform with how the state does it. Do you think the average voter, if you walked into a grocery store, into a Macy's, and you asked the average voter when elections are decided, what do you think they would say to you? November. That's how they vote for president. That's how they vote for governor. That's how they vote for their senators and their assembly members. But they don't realize that elections can be decided in June. It's about democracy. It's about full voter participation. It's not about all this complex stuff. Voters don't care. We lose voters because we have these conversations, and what happens? We confuse people. And why are we trying to confuse people? I don't know what the fear is about having the most possible people vote. What's the fear?
Let me ask you.
There isn't any. We're not.
Well,
Look,
Chris,
I want to ask one question. Though.
I've
I've
always
always
in our mouths.
So
Like
Chris-
we're not afraid of that. What we have a problem with is you being the one to decide what voters get to choose on when they change their
not
elections.
deciding that. The voters are deciding.
But the-
Look, Chris, you
But
said
voters
you
in June don't want
they're
voters in
deciding
June to
what you
vote, so
put in
why
front
should
of
they
them.
decide?
Chris, you said you didn't like the fact that the minority of voters that vote in June get to decide the two people, correct?
That's what you decided.
I understand. Look, you can look at me. It's okay.
I'm okay. Yeah.
If you're, but
Little
you're
closer,
okay, but you're okay with a system that lets that small minority of voters decide the one person. How can you object to a system that says You're going to let a small minority of people collect 2 so that the majority can select from the 2, but you're going to live with a system that says the minority of voters get to pick 1. And
I think what I just said in my opening was that let's have November-only elections. Let's do it. I'm ready to do it. Let's have it. Let's have a discussion
Then why
about it.
didn't you make that motion?
I did.
Wait a
I
minute.
made that motion.
Wait a minute. No. You made the motion
shot it
to
down.
go study it.
I said let's decide both of them. Let's have it.
But Steve, you guys put forward this motion. If what you wanted was November-only elections, you could have just as easily done that.
Let's talk about the practicality of it. The same reason why on the statewide basis we went to just the open primary. Eventually we'll go to ranked choice, just like we're supporting in Maine right now, a ranked choice.
What is the need for incrementalism, though? If it's the best way, why not do it?
Because, for example, in Washington, which has had the open primary for years and worked great, the folks tried to move too quick in Oregon, and the teachers union went around and misused and mischaracterized the change. It was too much change too fast. To Mickey's point, voters, you got to kind of warm them up in terms of getting the understanding. You throw too much change on them at once, but then the special interests and the politicians who benefit from low turnout
sitting in front of you.
People.
Here's the problem. You didn't know you had consensus because nobody asked, because you avoided the regular public process for a charter amendment. We just discovered here that both sides are willing to move elections to November.
Look, I wasn't.
And they're arguing over
Ryan,
whether a version written by one side gets to do it without any input from the other side. That's what's happening.
What's this boogeyman about? I wasn't involved in this in any way, so maybe I missed something. But
why are you here then?
I wasn't involved in the process down here. I was here because Scott Lewis has this bizarre idea that if I show up, I'll be more controversial and more interesting.
I was told that IVP was invited because IVP
put forward
and IVP offered you.
Don't be so serious.
See, I told you I'd be the calm one here.
Right. Right.
But as a matter of fact, we asked IVP who they wanted to speak for them, and they said you.
This is a serious issue. They are rewriting the rules of your election. It is not a joke.
Ryan, I'm 63 years old, okay? Let me tell you. We have people being killed on the streets. We have ridiculous wars being fought all over the world. We have a democracy.
I thought you told me to be less serious.
We have a democracy out of control on a national level. The seriousness of this issue relative to your future and my kids' future, my grandchildren, is about that big. So we can lighten up a little. If this fails, the world won't come to an end. We'll be back in court, and we will be suing on behalf of minority voters and young voters and unaffiliated voters. And the reason why we're here, we're the Independent Voter Project, not Candidate Project. And independent voters have very little reason to participate in primary elections that are dominated by the private corporations known as political parties.
Which is why we're willing to move it to November.
And your clients and the work that you do, and it's good work, and you're to be I'll do an advertisement. Ryan's a very good political consultant. If you need some work, he's a good guy to go to. He'll do very well for you.
All you normal people out there can really do a lot with that information.
But Ryan, you know perfectly well that your clients and the people that you represent, whether they be candidates or issues and such, tend to be funded by groups that have this preset mindset, which you and I probably agree is wrong, but nevertheless they believe, and the folks that generally are supportive of Mr. Cate believes, that these low turnout elections are important to maintain their political power.
I've been talking about the value of ranked choice voting in November way before you brought this issue up. What I cannot get past
well, then
is
why
the
didn't
fact
you go to the council and use the process you knew about that I didn't know about, and make sure that there were months of discussions about that? Nobody picked, Mr. Cate, you waited until the very last minute when other people brought the issue in front of you, and at the last minute you threw out a motion. Look, I served for 20 years. I know what a bullshit motion is when you're putting it on the thing in order to put something and bury it into a committee so we can study it forever. My turnip truck is long past me, but I still recognize that. So don't sit here and look me in the face and try to tell me, oh, I was making a sincere motion to go to ranked choice. You want to go to ranked choice, I'll tell you what. You and I will start the committee, and we'll go for a 2018 ballot measure, and we'll do a ranked choice measure.
Count me in.
I'm in. Let's do it.
All right, we'll do it.
All right, so
Wait, I have a
we now have evidence that this doesn't matter at all because by 2018 we're going to change the election again, apparently. But so hold on. I wanted to get to Mickey, but you just leveled an accusation at Councilman Cate, so I'll allow him to respond to that. You, this process, by the time it came to City Council, you put forward a motion to study the measure and look into other alternatives. Did you sincerely believe that was going to that
study, take action? I mean, I
consideration?
just agreed to open a committee with Mr. Peace and for 18 for election. I'm serious about this. If we want to do this, let's do this. And part of the issue that I have in sitting on the Charter Review Committee now for 2 years, looking at all these issues, is that if this was a serious consideration looking at changing either departments or whatever else, then we should have actually studied it. I mean, you look at LA, they took a year and a half to study change the electoral system. I don't think that's something that should be taken lightly, and that's why I put forward.
So you were on the committee for
let's
2
do it.
years and you never made a proposal until the last day when it came in front of you. And
I didn't make the proposal. You all did.
But that's my
right,
point.
hold
You're
on.
the city councilman. You were on the committee for 2 years. You made exactly 0 proposals.
Just
We'll
as
take
easily,
issue
I
with
could
that, but
say,
okay.
look,
You
so
were voting on a bunch of them right now in November.
the best evidence, I think, that this was in fact a rushed proposal is that the first time people started talking about it was about a year and a half ago, maybe even 2 years ago at this point, when Mickey Kasparian told Scott Lewis that it's time that we consider changing the way we settle June elections. Councilman Todd Gloria talked about the same thing at the same time, and then it basically faded from view all the way until June of this year.
Well, that's not
so
true. We wrote a letter in January.
Steve,
to
can I
the
get a
council.
word in edgewise
Let
here?
your friend talk.
Well, you guys keep making up stuff.
Well, just... Can I sit on that side?
Go ahead, Mickey. Mickey, what happened? You talked about this in spring of last year, and then we didn't hear about it publicly for a very long time. What happened?
Sure. Well, I talked about it a year and a half ago. I certainly didn't start it. I've talked about this for several years, and I think a lot of other people have talked about this for a lot of years. You know, the more and more this conversation has gone on, the more and more we get away from the voters, okay? Nobody on this panel right now is talking about the voters. We're talking about all these dynamics. These are why voters don't like politics, okay? That's why. Because we talk about all this complex stuff that voters don't care about. This whole intent, it wasn't a one side or the other, and it wasn't, we can point to things that happened this year in D1 that can fail that argument. This was about full voter participation. This was about maximizing our efforts to have the most people vote, and it was about conforming our efforts to the state. That's what this was about. It's simplistic. But yet, we're going to talk about all this stuff today and screw it all up. We're going to confuse people with all this minutia. Isn't this about voters? I mean, at the end of the day, isn't that what we're talking about? Who wants to elect a mayor, a city council member, a city attorney with 20 or 25% of the electorate? Don't we want to do it with 75% of the electorate? Don't we want to do that? I see all the heads shaking up and down. And I'm not sure what side you're on, if you're Republicans, Democrats, Independents, or what have you. Maybe people in this room are not even registered voters. It was about discussing it because it was about conforming with the state. Voters continually get confused. So the reason this was discussed years ago, Andy, was to allow the process to be consistent. And hang on a second, Ryan. And if people want to argue about being consistent with the state, right, and want to argue that having more people vote than less people, then that's what's screwed up about our system.
Ryan, I want to let you get in, but I want to point it in one direction, which is Mickey makes, in my opinion, a very good point. The substance of this is what is the right amount of people? When is it better to choose our leaders, with fewer people or with more people? What is the reason that any typical voter should be compelled by the process by which they get to make that substantive decision? Why shouldn't they just make the decision based on the substance of the issue, not the sausage making that brought it to them in the first place?
Well, I mean, in this case, I think that the reason they should decide is because it's setting a dangerous precedent that we now just apparently decided we're going to be changing our election rules every 2 years, at least for a while. I think that's a dangerous road to go down. And the other reason is that I think that if there are better alternatives, then why should we have to settle for something that half the people on the stage just acknowledged was actually an inferior product that we're putting in front of voters? So if three,
that's not,
if
Ryan,
at least three of us,
that's a good political consulting thing for a mailer, but don't sit in front of me and misuse my own words. What
I thought we were on the same team with ranked choice voting.
Steve, have I not done a good job of giving you opportunity to talk?
Listen,
Can you just wait your turn?
No, nobody said it was inferior. What's inferior is letting 20% of the people decide in primary.
You did, in
right?
fact, say that to be clear, you did say that the other way would be better, but you need to do it in steps. Right. So it does seem to suggest that it's inferior.
So my sole argument to those in this room is if the other way is better, why don't we all agree to go with that in 2018? And we could have done it this year, except we didn't try to get consensus. So this is what we have in front of us now. Now, I think Mickey makes a great point about consistency here, and I have a serious question. And we can argue about whether it's more important to be consistent or better to have the most optimal voting system like ranked choice voting. But would you support making San Diego Unified School District elections the same as what you're proposing for the city, meaning district only, June, and a mandatory November runoff?
Mickey, would you support that? So I should clarify for the crowd that there is out of consistency, there is a slight difference here. School board elections have a district only primary runoff, and then they go to November where this entire city gets to vote based on the two people that the district selected. In the city, it is not like that. The two people that are elected in the June primary go forward, and again, the district only votes again. Would you propose that change if consistency is important?
So, I really like being the calm guy on the
I like it too.
on the dais too, yeah. It's kind of a new look. But, Ryan, with all due respect, this is the shell game. So we're starting to play. So
I'm not going to get an answer because he doesn't actually believe in consistency.
Excuse me, let me finish, okay? I let you talk. I've never interrupted you. Okay?
That's my job.
Yeah, that's your job. Yeah, you interrupt me. So we're supposed to be on the same
Thank God.
side. No, it's not a point. It's about playing the shell game. It's about diverting the subject. Now we're talking about school districts. I'm not here to talk about school districts. I'm here to talk about Measure K and Measure L. And let's not confuse the issue with all this. This is, again, back to my point. We just want to confuse people. And I'm not gonna be in that position where you're gonna try to play the shell game with me. Let's talk about Measure K and L. Explain to me why conforming with the state and having the highest voter participation happen in November, why you are going to spend globs of money against that. That's what we're here to talk about. The next thing you'll be talking about with me is the war in Iraq. I don't want to get into all that stuff.
Steve already brought up the war in Iraq.
It's just about, we have an issue that we're here to talk about, so let's stay focused on that issue and not move the shells around.
Well, I think this is a really smart crowd here, and I think you can handle a question like, should we apply the same standard to our school district that we apply to our city council if consistency is our driving principle here? I think those of you in this room can stick with this. I think you're smart enough to do that. And I'll answer it again. The reason why we should vote no on Measure K is that we've been offered the inferior product. And we have agreement now to put a better product, or both options, or other options. We could do plurality, ranked choice, and this proposal, and let the voters decide which one they prefer. But we're only giving them one option that the city attorney said they didn't have time to do legal analysis on. A budget analysis was not done before it was voted on. This is based on a 10-year-old study that is already dramatically out of date. That's the only research we had on this before it was put in front of voters. Why not give voters 2 or 3 options to choose from? And again, if this is really about consistency, then why can we not get any consistency when it comes to our school board election?
And that's not true about a budget analysis not being done. That is incorrect. Because a budget analysis,
done after it was voted to be put on the ballot.
A budget analysis, okay, so it was done, okay?
Not before the council member. They voted to put on the ballot without having any analysis.
Well, what we can tell people is that the budget analysis, the independent budget analysis, indicated that this, for Measure K, would only cost a few cents extra per voter and would cost nothing in addition for Measure L. So the argument about this increase in cost It has no validity whatsoever.
But the city attorney one, where they said they didn't have a time to study it based on the Voting Rights Act at the state and federal level, is true.
The
They
city
did say
attorney
that
has
a lot.
held up everything in this city. I mean, you know, the bad example is bringing Jan Goldsmith and his policies into this city. He has helped. He is everything what's been wrong with this city because he's held everything back.
All right, Chris, I do want to ask, though, but the question before voters will not be whether they support the new consensus that's been forged on stage to put ranked choice on the ballot in 2018. The choice for voters will be whether to make this very specific change about runoff elections going to November. There seems to be some consensus that the optimal choice would be required runoff, but again, that's not on the ballot. The ballot is present system or this new proposal. Do you have an argument that the new proposal is in fact worse than how we decide elections right now? Do you believe that? Do you believe that this change would be worse for democracy?
I don't know if it'd be worse for, because that's a very bold statement. What I would say is that based on taking K and L together, that you are judging voters in two different lights and you're placing two different parameters on two different sets of voters. And that's what I have an inherent problem with, is that you're okay with June voters voting on some things, but not all things, and you're okay with November voters on some things, but potentially not other things. And that's where I have the inherent conflict with, is that there's an inconsistency in just on the two proposals alone on their face. And that's where I believe that we should vote this down and have, as what was said, a consistent process for how we do things. And again, looking at the voters, if we want November voters to decide ballot measures, referendums, initiatives, why can't November voters only decide those candidates as well, too?
Steve, out of the 10 largest cities in the United States, San Diego would be the first to have this system. Jeff Marston, in an op-ed for Voice of San Diego, described our current law as democracy destroying. What is it that allows these other large cities, many run by intelligent people, not to recognize that the system by which they elect their officials is democracy destroying?
Well, first of all, let me speak to the process question. California's open primary got onto the ballot because one Republican legislator, state senator, had the courage to stand up and, in the face of opposition from organized labor and the Democrats, and leverage the budget process into placing the measure Independent Voter Project had written onto the ballot. By any measure, that was a less clean, so to speak, and open process. It was last-minute budget, and it was heavily criticized. And labor ran campaigns attacking Governor Schwarzenegger and the small group of courageous Republicans who stood up truthfully both against their fellow Republicans and against their fellow Democrats. So process is often used to obfuscate and to prevent progress. And to your question, tell me which of these cities you think is being run so well. Tell me, is it Chicago?
New York City just introduced pre-K for all. It seems like a pretty good program.
And I'm sure there's some good ideas in each of those cities. But I'm not here to defend the state of democracy in the United States of America. On the contrary, I think we're in big trouble. I think I've watched, and I feel some responsibility for it. I'm part of the generation who inherited a wonderful representative democracy process, and we've watched it unravel. I and my colleagues who served in the legislature, and both as staff members, as lobbyists, as lawyers, as members of the legislature, many of them quietly behind the scenes worked to write that open primary, and we did it because we knew we failed our children. And we failed them by fundamentally not passing on the values of representative democracy, and by fundamentally failing to get across the point that democracy, you heard it this morning in the opening presentation. How many of you here were here this morning? The gentleman from National Review. And what did he say? He said that people don't understand. And he was talking about the elected officials, and he's exactly right. This generation of elected officials don't even understand that the fundamental basis of our system is compromise and accommodation. And as a result, we now elect people who think their job is to cheerlead for the side they got elected for. Willie Brown used to say, the difference between being an elected official and being a politician is being able to go back to the people that got you elected, your closest friends, and say no. And that's the lost art. Mickey knows this. He had to deal with me. How many times I say no to you? And
I got to deal with you today.
Yeah, exactly.
Steve, all due respect to your soaring rhetoric, what does this have to do with Measure K?
It has everything to do with Measure K.
Well,
I said at the beginning,
Connect them, please.
It is that when you have an electoral system, that ultimately the decisions are made when everybody vote, when more people vote. The politicians in the system, as I said, Councilman Cate will be fine. He's going to get reelected. But he's going to have to communicate differently with his constituents. He's going to have to think differently. And most importantly, he's going to be able to say no to people he can't say no to today.
He got elected in November.
And I say no now, so.
Mickey, so you've mentioned a few times that this is about the voters. Let's talk about the voters. It has always passed the smell test to me that most people don't understand that final decisions are being made in June. However, I've never seen any actual evidence that that is contributing to their reason not to show up in June. Again, passes the smell test, but you're pushing an initiative. This is the time to lay out all the facts. Do we have any evidence that reduced turnout in June is because people are being misled and they don't know that they are in fact making final decisions?
By the way, I just noticed these guys are dressed a lot better than we are, so I just, for whatever that's worth. Look.
That's how they told me.
Yeah, exactly.
You're all dressed better than me.
That is not surprising, Ryan.
Yeah.
You did what you were told.
At least
and that's the point.
Yeah. At least I'm dressed better than Steve. Look, I think there's two words that shows evidence: primary and general. People do not necessarily come out in a primary election. If the President of the United States, if people thought that that election could be decided in June, if people thought that voting for governor could be decided in June, and then in San Diego you could elect a mayor or a council member in June, then I probably wouldn't have a lot of evidence. But when you elect offices that are at the top ranks in November, you could not find the average voter that would tell you, ask any voter, just go into a grocery store one day and just ask. We've done this. We've talked to a lot of our members and we've asked them. We've had all...
Union grocery store, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's got to be a Union grocery store. I mean, come on, what are we talking about here? I don't know where Chris and Ryan shop, but I know where I shop, okay? But seriously, do you really think... I know you asked the question and you asked about evidence, and we've done some, polling with our own members and just people in the community. The average person does not... The average person, more than the average person, does not know, does not realize we could elect the mayor in San Diego in June. It's a primary. Top two people go to November, right? And so when we say evidence, have we polled every voter that comes out of? No, of course not. But does that make sense? Does the word primary and general mean anything to anybody? It's huge. Nobody in their right mind would believe, Andy, that a mayor would be elected in this city in June. And that's what's wrong, because the voters are confused. We have different systems. And why? It's back to, I've asked this question, an hour ago. Why don't we want to just conform to the way the state does it? Why? What's the issue? What's the resistance? I know, Chris, you're going to get elected in June and November, right? You are. So what's the resistance?
A lot of support for Chris.
Yeah.
I'm going to cash in on that later.
I almost pulled out the chair for you here. So I just think that it's about consistency, and it's about really giving a damn about the voters.
Ryan, you said at the beginning that you don't actually think that this will change outcomes, or that you have doubts that this will distinctly change outcomes. I think that's pretty counterintuitive for the however many people in this room are familiar with some of the races that people think may have been different had they been stretched into November. What evidence do you have for the fact that that maybe there won't actually be any distinctly different outcomes?
So I'm just curious. I'm completely open-minded on this point. How many people in this room did not know that Kevin Faulconer could be reelected in June?
Well, That's the point, Ryan. You just made Mickey's point, because everybody in this room are high-propensity voters.
hold on.
The Mickey point is that this isn't an
Do we get
initiative
time
for
here?
us.
I'm
This is not about us. No,
Steve,
Ryan, because
I-
this is the argument. This is the point. This initiative is about working people and real people who don't live, eat, and breathe politics. Everybody in this room, all of us are weird. We pay attention to this stuff. The real people who have real lives don't focus until later.
Let's go back to Ryan.
Disputing.
You just made the
I'm not
point.
disputing. I'm not saying this is a representative sample. I was genuinely just curious, and I would expect nothing less of Steve than to immediately jump up and dismiss the entire point that was just made there. But it is
Only
nice
when
to know,
you accomplished it for
that,
yourself.
that only about 2 of you didn't know that that was the case, and that's the only evidence that we've got here. So that's what I'm using. The evidence with respect to whether it changes outcomes and why I don't believe it changes outcomes, let me give you an example here. What started this discussion over a year ago was the mayor's race, and the argument that candidates couldn't be recruited because they didn't think that it would go to, or something along those lines, that it wouldn't go to November and therefore they wouldn't get in the race or something to that effect. All right, so the idea here was that June is so much better for Republican Mayor Kevin Faulconer than November, and that's the issue. Here's what happened in June. In June, Democrats in the city turned out at 60%. Republicans turned out at 55%, and independents, totally agree with you on this point, Steve, independents turned out at 36%. That's abysmal, completely agree, which is why I'm okay moving to November.
There are some
Now,
extenuating circumstances this year. It was
But
contested
compare that,
presidential.
compare that to November 2012, okay? November 2012, Democrats voted at 77% and Republicans voted at 81%, meaning the two parties who turned out more flipped. So June was actually dramatically better for Democrats this year than November of 2012 was. So my point on this is you don't know which month is going to be better in what year, and that's the way it should be.
And that's why this is bipartisan. It was a great point you just made. And maybe the reason why more Democrats came out, but maybe the reason why more Democrats came out this June was because the Hillary Clinton-Bernie Sanders race was still in the mix. Donald Trump had already solidified himself as the candidate. And quite frankly, that could have affected what happened in District 1. That's why maybe Barbara Bree almost got more than 50% plus one. That's why the whole, I'm so glad you said that. It's a bipartisan. People say, well, this is a left thing, it's a Democrat thing. It's bipartisan. You never know how it's going to turn out, and that's why it's good, because it works for everyone.
We also said in the first
concede.
5 minutes of this discussion that we were fine settling races in November, and the question is, what type of election system should we have if we're going to do that? So I don't understand what the point is that
So
we
Ryan,
keep
here's the
disagreeing.
answer. First of all, we agree it won't change outcomes. It changes the behaviors of politicians after they get elected. Said that at the very beginning. Second, are there even better ideas? Yes, there certainly are. But we ought to do that when we decide to move to ranked choice. We should do it on a statewide basis, do all the cities at once. We got a couple of cities in Northern California starting to do it.
Well, you're going to start. We're going to do San Diego first, though, because you committed to that.
We don't need to do San. We can do it. We're going to do 2018. Independent Voter Project is going to be trying to bring ranked choice statewide. Okay, I'm glad to have recruited you into that agenda. But let me go to your statistics beyond the fact, Ryan, that remember you got different numbers. Your raw number effect of those things are different. We totally agree. It doesn't change the outcome. But as a civil rights issue, and there's look, if we were to call independent voters Latino voters or women voters or black voters or Jewish voters, we'd understand better. These are people who choose to exercise their right of private association by not joining a party. Political parties are private corporations, and we have a system that biases in favor of voters who chose to join the private corporation. They get more voter rights. That's a fundamentally flawed concept. It takes years to win these arguments in court, and to the extent the Independent Voter Project has to continue to enter into lawsuits, as we have in New Jersey, Hawaii, and elsewhere, we will. And we'll eventually win this in court as a civil rights issue. But every time we have an opportunity, whether it's to enter into a city council because there's enough votes to put it on the ballot, to empower the independent voters, not candidates, to have a fair and equal say in who represents them at the local level, the state level, and the national level, we will intervene.
Okay, so I do need to add one thing here, because there is this interesting consensus now, I think, especially post this June, that everyone here, I believe, is now saying that we don't actually believe this will change the outcome of elections. Now, I want to throw in here, here's my problem. If I take you at face value and say that you're sincere about that, that's great. That's not what was said a year ago, though. So my objection here is that while I may think this won't change the outcome of elections, I have a real problem when somebody says, I want to change the rules of the elections because I believe it will change the outcome, which is what was said a year ago.
No,
By the way, I haven't said that. So
Ryan.
maybe the three of you have said that, but I haven't said that.
It was.
Ryan, wait, guys. Time out. Ryan.
There is no question that when this was discussed a year ago, it was explicitly discussed on the difficulty of recruiting candidates that could be actually competitive with Mayor Kevin Faulconer. There's no question that that's the case.
Look, I live in a different space than you guys live in. I really
You're pretty close to me right now.
I really don't care about Democrats or Republicans or anything. I care about how my elected officials behave after they get elected. And I want them to be responsive to individual voters. Yes, we all have collective things and things we join and everything, but the fundamental reason why democracy can work is because we empower individual voters. And any system that diminishes the power of the individual voter is suboptimal. From the day one, long before you guys had your political circle conversations, you could have gone to IVP or listened to the comments I made or Jeff or others. When we campaigned for open primary, it was the same narrative. It changes the behavior. Now, we had people in our coalition that thought it was going to suddenly turn the legislature Republican. I said publicly and privately they were wrong, but it did change the complexion of the legislature and how they behave. I'm going to go back to Lorena Gonzalez's comment. She opposed it. She was a political person. She was a political operative. She looked at it through the same lens you're looking at it through, Ryan, and she didn't see that in the world that Councilman Cate lives in which you try to do the very best you can for your constituents with hopelessly inadequate information, with terrible time constraints, and where all the interest groups know more about it than you know because they live with the consequence of the work product day in and day out. And you try to do your very best. You will find, because I've lived under both cultures in your shoes, you will find a tremendous freedom. And you'll find that you're going to get to be the representative that you thought you were going to be when you looked in the textbooks and thought what democracy was going to be about, instead of the cynical world that we got forced into, being driven by political consultants.
I'm experiencing whiplash.
Being driven by political consultants and a Twitter-based media that drives us into an environment where we know more about the state of health of Donald Trump and the state of health of Hillary Clinton than we know about their positions about the state of health of American health care. That's what's wrong with the country, and we're all in it together. We're all responsible for it.
Steve,
we're not going to fix it until we take it out of the hands of the petty, irrelevant, silly conversation that dominates politics and put it back in the hands of independent, individual voters who are worried about putting a roof over their head and food on their table.
Steve, a minute ago you said that there are very serious problems in the world and win, lose, or draw Measure K won't change them. Now you've put it at the base level of whether we all live or die. Please tell me whether Andrew, this is important or not.
Andrew, look, it's a measure of either how poorly I'm communicating or how poorly you're listening. It's probably a combination of both. It's probably a combination of both. We're just a little piece of what's going on, okay? Democracy's crumbling around us. We're busy lecturing to the world about the way things ought to be. We're trying to tell other people, in other countries and other parts of the world, about how they run their lives. And we've got horrible difficulties in resolving our differences. The only difference in a democracy, democracy is just the alternative of shooting each other when we disagree, right?
Okay.
And so this is a little step in moving power away from the powerful, and in this case, in this town, no more than 6 to 10 families who have controlled outcomes since the day I was born in 1953.
But this won't affect outcomes.
It will, because it'll change the behavior of legislators. You know, see, this is what who gets elected isn't what's important. It's the behavior of the people after they get elected.
And I agree with that. So what I expect from you then is after this November election, I expect you, Steve Peace, citizen, Ally Garden residents, to be down at City Hall holding elected officials accountable. Now, I have a little difficulty.
I can do that if you want.
I know you do. I love seeing you down in the front row, Mickey. I really do. Saying hi to you and everything. But I have a real difficulty in believing that how someone gets elected is going to impact how good they are as a legislature. I think that just varies with the individual. I think it varies with what that individual's priorities are, what they want to do, and that's where it's up to all of you at city council meetings to hold your council member accountable, not because how they were elected, but because how they act and what do they do.
When you're ultimately going to be judged by 20% of the electorate, and you know that, versus 80% of the electorate, and you know that, no matter how hard you try and no matter how much and you may be able to rise above it, but my experience in the legislature with 120 colleagues was private conversations even where my colleagues just angst and just felt terrible about the fact that they wanted to behave differently, but they couldn't because they knew they would get primaried.
Maybe I'm an eternal optimist or naive, but I fully believe in what you said about representative democracy and having the power of the individual and holding public officials accountable. I believe in all that, and maybe I haven't been jaded yet in my short tenure on time, but I truly believe that whether individuals are elected to serve or voted by 20% of the people or 80% of the people, and I can't remember what the turnout was in my election in November, but I believe that I represent everybody, and I wholly believe that my colleagues on the council believe that as well.
All right, we're going to go to some audience questions. Here's one. Ryan, you've said a few times that Measure K sets a dangerous precedent. What is the danger?
The danger is that we start changing the rules to try to impact the outcomes, as I mentioned before. And again, I disagree that the outcomes will change, but I think the idea that you could change the rules because you want to change the outcomes is a dangerous one. And let me offer, since we're doing this kumbaya thing, let me offer a practical way that this could have gone differently, that we could have had better functioning democracy on this issue. This issue could have been handled the way that Los Angeles handled it, which is form an independent commission a year ago. Have them go out into every community of the city and have a discussion about how our elections work, what the other options are. Put together a report, give it to the city council, make a big deal about the fact that you're going to have a public debate over this. Get public input, more than 3 comments. I think it was 3 comments from the public before this was put on the ballot. And then see if we have a consensus, because I think what we've discovered is we probably would have had a consensus, except nobody even tried to do that.
You know,
So, Steve,
that consensus.
Steve, I'm going to you. Just hang on 2 seconds. Steve, hang on 2 seconds. Steve, hang on 2 seconds. So this is an audience question, and it relates to what Ryan just said. It's if you acknowledge that all November elections is best, why waste the time with this that's going to be on the ballot for 2 or 4 years, and instead go to work now about putting all November ballots on the election?
2 reasons. First, had we tried to do that, the same people that are funding Ryan's campaign would have pressured the same council members behind the scene. We never would have gotten that measure to the ballot. It would have gone to a study, and then it'd be a commission. It's why people, government, another commission, another study, another don't do anything. And we all know that. You guys can roll your eyes. And
I don't agree with that. But
LA did it that way.
I mean, you were able to get it through
and
this.
Do they have it done?
Why not that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you were able to get this through, though.
Number two, moving from the system we have today all the way to ranked choice, and there are many versions of ranked choice, which is what everybody would have argued about, would be a tremendous jump, and I think more than you can expect the electorate to digest in one swallow. 3, we would prefer to consolidate that effort and do it on a statewide basis at the same time and I had not heard Mickey articulate this position of consistency before today, but for the same reasons that Mickey articulated early. It's better to do this all at once so that voters are looking at the same system. And Chris, to your point about the baby, look at the voting records and how they changed amongst California members of Congress pre-open primary and post-open primary. If we had Congress members all over the country who were in open primaries rather than the closed primaries, you wouldn't see the gridlock in Congress that you see today. Our colleagues, Democrat and Republican alike, in the California delegation have become much more reasonable, much less attuned to the partisan nonsense that goes in Washington, and it's because of open primaries. It's because they're judged in the general and not the primary.
I hope you're saying I wasn't reasonable before this. You know, I'm still reasonable now before this
You're
goes into
eminently
effect.
reasonable. That's why I think you're educable.
Mickey, this one's for you. It is possible now that this will just lead to even more ballot crowding, that November is going to be an even weightier ballot than we're going to deal with this year, spreading out the potential attention for any one race and leading to even less educated decisions. Do you have any concern about the fact that putting all of these measures on a November ballot will lead to making it much harder for voters to be educated on every race?
Well, and the more issues that are on a ballot, certainly. I mean, it's, there's everything at the state level. I mean, there's, marijuana, there's porn stuff that's on, the state level. I mean, there's everything you can imagine that's on this ballot. But the time is just right. And, if not now, then what do we say at the next election? Well, there's a lot of stuff on the ballot. We got a governor's race. I mean, it's a long time coming. And so I think, again, look, I just want to, we've heard a lot today in an hour and a half, and, they're bringing the stuff to November and all this other stuff. Consistency with the state will not have voter confusion any longer. So to me, that's the best argument that we can articulate to the voters. So whether there's 50 measures out there, 10, 5, I mean, the time is right to do it now.
So here's another audience question, which was, the no side is struggling to make a succinct case against K. Can either of you explain why K is bad, other than there are better options or we don't like the process?
Well, first of all, those are pretty good reasons why. Let's take a less than ideal option that came to us through a messed up process is not a compelling argument to vote for it.
That directly conflicts with the other measure that the same proponents put on the ballot.
But answer me simply. Do you guys think this system will be better or worse than our current system?
I think it will be worse if it passes, because we could very easily get into a tit for tat, back and forth, tweaking the election rules to try to benefit one side or the other, if that's the path that we go down here.
I like that answer.
So, Ryan, these are all the same exact arguments we heard on open primary in California. And,
Steve, I was for open primary. Chevron and California Chamber of Commerce funded that stuff. I thought it was wonderful. That's been great for them. I don't know that Sacramento's working that great right now, though, and I don't know that I want to model San Diego after it.
And none of the things that none of the dire political predictions came true, including did not cost much more. We didn't get into it. I'm surprised you guys didn't make some of the arguments. But it's a simple thing. Do you want elections to be decided when between 60 and 80% of the people vote? Or do you want elections to be decided when between
And I think
20
we've
and
answered
40?
that question a million times this afternoon. I think we've said,
you really haven't.
Well, I just said we
it's
just
just like
agreed
when
to
you-
do that. We just agreed to
Steve, when you're on the
undergo this
dais-
effort next year.
When you're on the dais and you have a proposal in front of you, there comes a time where you either vote yes or you vote no.
Absolutely.
And so your choice is between a system in which 20% of the voters pick one person and they win, or 20% of the voters pick two people and then 80% pick from the two. I will admit that's an imperfect system. Everything in life is imperfect. You don't stop making progress because you didn't come up with the perfect solution. Otherwise, we'd never get anywhere. So it's really kind of simple. You're either for keeping a system that allows 20% of the voters to pick the king, or you're for a system that allows the other 60% of the voters to at least participate.
And I think San Diego Unified and the children of San Diego deserve the system you're describing just as much as every other voter here.
So you're saying if they had included San Diego Unified, you'd be on the yes side.
You know
But
what?
it didn't. But no, the world's in black and
might have-
white,
you
and
might
it
have
didn't.
found
So you had option of
another
voting
form
yes
of
or no.
justice.
So
Ryan didn't need your help.
We're building a lot of
He's dying
consensus
by
here.
himself.
Steve, this is just a fantastic audience question. Whoever sent this, good job. Good job. Please tell us the 6 to 10 families that run San Diego.
I don't think I can get to the
I'm serious, please.
Cushman, Evans, Brown,
C. Terry Brown.
Burnham. Who else? You can help me, Scott. They all contribute.
No one help him. Help him.
You know what you can do is look to the KPBS donor list and the Voice of San Diego donor list, and that's them.
Hell, I'm just glad I'm not on that list.
Okay, so here's one for.
Or you can look at port leases and city leases, for hotels. That pretty much tells you what the.
So here's another one for you, Mickey. Where is it? Sorry. If the issue is voter education and turnout, why aren't we putting money into increased paratransit to the polls, pushing early voting, and other structural solutions that would increase that turnout?
Well, there's a multitude of things we can do to increase turnout. I mean, we would all agree that we don't have enough people voting. I mean, we all agree on that, right? And there's a multitude of things that we can do, together and apart to change that. But
Steve, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No.
Steve, do you think that they agree with what he just laid out? You seem to have said some things today that you think the opponents actually don't agree with that stipulation, that increased voter turnout is good and everyone agrees with it.
I don't think any politician who had any interest in continuing in public life would admit to favoring a system that was biased toward making decisions when less people voted. It would be political suicide to stand up and admit that your political interest is rooted in maintaining a system that produces outcomes.
But you are making an allegation that
Wait a minute. This is the modern media. You jump to it. No, you can't expect any politician to say that. You have interest groups who, I think Ryan's correct, wrongly believe that perpetuating their power is dependent on perpetuating the system. They know how to play the game, and the people in power, and I've been in this, I've been in the room with Cushman and Malin Burnham when they came up with the idea to create an airport authority, for example, okay? And I've been the politician who sit there and then the public conversation is, I thought of some idea for an airport authority. That's the way the world works. It's not new to the current environment. But what I came to understand as I got out of politics and look back at the good parts, the bad parts, and this kind of thing, it's imperfect. It's always going to be imperfect. But at the end of the day, what's really fascinating is that the people that don't get involved in politics are the smartest people. And they're the people that vote in November. And the reason why they're smarter than all the rest of us is they're not distracted by these intellectual back and forth that we get involved in. They're just trying to eat. They're trying to put food on the table. They're trying to put a roof over their head. And they know that all this convoluted overcomplication that we have fallen victim to in government is killing the country. And I have an absolute faith that if we change our electoral system so that the Cushmans and the Evans and the Pieces and the Mickeys and others have less influences on the Mr. Cates, that everyday people will, as imperfect as their view of the world is, it'll be better than ours.
Mickey, back to you. I cut you off. Why aren't we spending more money directly increasing turnout if that's the end result that we all want?
Well, who's to say we're not? Who's to say we're not trying? As a leader of a labor union, we do a multitude of things to at least get our union members to understand and turn them out, right? So there is definitely a lot of things that we are doing. Could we be doing more? Of course we could. But, you know, the best way to turn people out is to change this system. And again, if we're conforming with the state, I think Steve just articulated this, if we can have candidates and initiatives decided when 70 or 80% of the people are voting, rather than 20 to 30%, isn't that exactly why we want to vote yes on this measure? I mean, that's the bottom line here. By the way, when this started, I really needed a bottle of water. Now I think I need a beer.
You need a beer? Get out of here. All right. So we'll make that the last word. No was yes was able to start and finish, but that's all we have for today. Scott, do you have anything else? I do. All right. Here we go.
First, let's hear it for the panel. Good job. Happy to sit down with you with our donor list if you'd like. But I do want to make a point on that. Well, let's also hear it for Andy, the moderator. You all right?